The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod, and don't adjust your computer. This is not Halloween. I'm not doing a Ray Charles impersonation. I was going to come in and tell you guys the future is so bright that I had to wear shades. The truth is I've got a double eye infection, which is part of the reason why I wasn't here for part of Thursday and you saw the rerun of me shaving my head. So A, I don't want to treat you to the lovely redness that is my eyes, but B, the light, and my eyes are a little bit sensitive with the medicine that they've got, so it's a little bit better for me to have the sunglasses on. Excuse my face is what I want to say to you guys. I greatly have been appreciating the last couple of days Bob Costas when he did the Olympics a couple of years ago when he got an eye infection, and the first day, you know, it just sort of looked a little, and then it looked worse, and then the third day he had to wear the glasses, and the fourth day they sent him home. I don't want to be sent home. There's too much to talk about. So I'm thrilled that I get a chance to be here with you guys, but I apologize for the sunglasses. It'll all get better, maybe even by tomorrow. In any case, we've got an amazing show for you here today. In just a few minutes, we're going to be showing you a rerun, a really good rerun of Ask Dr. Doreen with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh answering your questions. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. And then in the second hour, Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson will be joining me. She's been in the news a little bit, and we'll see if she wants to talk about that. Some of you might be aware of her being in the news. I don't know. But we've got other in the news definitely to cover this morning. And we've got two amazing guests with us this morning. We have the amazing Vince Redmond, who's going to be with us, and J.R. Weeks is going to be with us as well, talking about his journey being diagnosed with autism. So with Vince, we're really going to delve into some back to school tips. Some of you, your kids have already started. Some of you are starting next week. And then for the next 3 weeks, it's like this slow rollout until after Labor Day, officially everyone is back in school. But it can be, you know, we don't want to put too much pressure on the first day of school, but it really can set a tone. And, you know, we're all about antecedent modification here, so that if we can do things to get our kids as ready as possible, if we can do things to get the school as ready as possible, if we can do things to get ourselves as ready as possible, then woohoo, it's all good, right? Including, can we all go to bed earlier? Can we officially now all go to bed earlier? That's all I want for Christmas, is to go to bed earlier. Excuse me, in any case, there are lots of different ways for you to connect with us here on the show, and Samantha's going to show you some of the different ways that you can connect, even during this recorded first segment that we're going to be doing with Dr. Granpeesheh. I'll be watching the questions that you guys write in. I'll be watching the ticker tape of that and responding to you guys while you're watching live. And of course, in the second hour, we'll be back live. So Samantha's showing you all the different ways that you can connect with us. Let me remind you that our homepage is autism-live.com. When you go there, so many things to do. Please feel free to click on the triangle that's on the computer screen. That will start the live show, or the most recently recorded live show playing, depending on if we're live when you actually click it. If you click it now, you'll be watching this, right? Now, to the side of all that is something called the live feature. It's a series of white boxes. If you put your cursor in the box that says your question, all you have to do is type and hit enter. You don't have to log in. You don't have to have a username. You don't have to have a password that has, you know, 2 letters and one, oh, you know, save me. Or, I love those things now that you have to do to prove that you're not a bot, right? Can't stand them. So you don't have to do any of that. There's no ask for a credit card because everything is free. And we're not asking for you to have to give your information. If you'd like to, because you want to be on our email list and you want to get our weekly postcard telling you who's going to be on the show, there is a place just above the computer screen that says join our mailing list. Click that and we're happy to take your information and send you the weekly viewer guide. We won't send you endless emails because we know you're too busy for that, right? But in any case, type in, if you want to talk to me anonymously during the show, all you have to do is type in your question, your comment, hit enter, and it shows up here. You and I can have a conversation, but you can have conversation with our experts and guests that are on the show, which is really, really fun. And you can do this on Facebook and on YouTube, but then everybody gets to see who's asking the question, which is perfectly fine, except when it's not, right? And when it's not, please use our live feature. It's a really great way to communicate with us live. All right, my friends, it is now time for Ask Dr. Doreen. Welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen. We welcome Dr. Doreen Grampichet to the show.
Good morning.
And I was saying how lovely you look today, as
you.
always.
So kind.
To be as intelligent as you are, as kind and considerate, and to be as beautiful, and to have a fashion sense.
Thank you.
Just making us all look bad.
What did you call me? A fashion
I said
maven?
she's a fashion maven this morning.
Thank you.
That's what I said, and we had quite a discussion about that. I look like I've been hit by a tomato and I'm on my way to a funeral, but who's counting, right?
No.
In any case, for those of you who are new and have not seen our show before, because each show now we're getting more and more viewers from
That's
around the
awesome.
world that are new. We have Mexico watching this morning. Shout out to Mexico.
Terrific.
Dr. Grampichet is a true expert in the field of autism. I believe the preeminent expert in our time, and there is no other time for autism. So that's of all time. She has been working in this field for 30 years. I hate to call her out on it because her skin says otherwise.
You know what? Next year it's going to be 40 years.
Is it really?
Next year.
Okay. Well,
Is that
then I have
right?
to,
Yeah, I think so.
then I have to stop mumbling my
pretty
30
crazy.
because it's a huge accomplishment. She's
Thank
been
you.
working in this field with all areas across the spectrum, from babies to senior citizens, and getting amazing results. So we're thrilled that we have somebody of her caliber
Thank you
to
very
be
much.
with us for a week, every week for an hour to answer your questions.
A lot of fun.
It's great and it's very exciting. We can't possibly get to all of the questions that come in, so
Right.
we try to do as best as we can, but don't hesitate to ask your question again. If we don't get it in this week, feel free to put it in. I really try to pay attention to that. And we always have a question at the start of the show that comes in before the show as a kickoff. So feel free to send your questions in all week long. In fact, I want to get to our first question here. Oh, I have to give the disclaimer first. There is no expert in this field who could give individual specific advice in this format, even Dr. Doreen, because it would be a disservice to the folks on the autism spectrum to think that just through a few lines in an email that we could have enough information that even someone of your caliber could give individual specific advice. So this is meant to be a jumping off place
Right.
where we can pick her brain and get to know what it's like to know as much as she knows without having to take a trip around the world or a trip around the internet.
Thank you.
Even then we wouldn't get to it. So in any case, we had a question that came in via email, and for those of you who have a longer question sometimes who want to write in via email, you can send it to me, S as in Sam, .penrod, Penrod, at autism-live.com, because then you can write to your heart's content.
Yes.
And this is a longer question, and the parent gave me permission to shorten it, but I feel like there's some really important stuff that a lot of parents are going to relate to here.
Great. That's really
So I'm gonna try to get to most of it, and it's got some backstory. She says, my son is 3 years old, diagnosed with autism. He's currently receiving 13 hours a week in-home ABA therapy and has 2 therapists that alternate days. These therapists have been with my son for a year now, so I'd like to think that they know my son very well. My son has been in ABA therapy for 2 years now, and I thought that I understood the approach and technique behind ABA, but the past 2 months has me questioning probably, she says in parentheses, overthinking too much. What exactly is done and why? My son is doing so well, progressing and just flying through any goal that is placed. He had met all the goals his ABA company placed, and then they did an assessment on him and came up with more goals, demands that he needs to meet. Anytime in the past, my son was fine with this change up and flew through it. This time, they're a little more strict with him in terms of pushing him during the sessions until he gets something right, making him stay in one room for 2 to 3 hour sessions instead of him being allowed to change rooms, instead of him being allowed to come see mom when he asks to or go outside for a bit. He has a token board, and the therapist asks him what he would like to work for, which is usually his iPad. And when he gets 5 trucks on his token board, he gets his iPad. He's struggling with some of the demands and goals being placed. They ask him, who is holding the block? To which he replies or repeats, holding the block. Then they say the child's name or I'm holding the block. Every time he will just repeat holding the block. And when they try to correct him, he gets frustrated and has a meltdown. His meltdowns are usually a hysterical cry, like a sad cry. He cries hysterically when he's pushed, and in his eyes, he's answered the question right. He cries for mama, but I'm not allowed in there. They only want me to be a part of therapy for a few minutes each day. So I end up sitting on my hallway floor, sobbing, while listening to my child scream hysterically, see mama, over and over again. My question is, should ABA therapy be this hard, let alone for a 3-year-old child? I know there will be tears and sometimes it can be rough. I've dealt with my fair share already, but every single day and all through the session like this, a friend once told me that good ABA is fun for the child and will seem like play to them. That's why I'm questioning this. If what's being done is how it's supposed to be, then I'll keep going. If it's not, then I need to know so I can speak up for my son and tell them how the session should go. It seems like a waste of a session to me when a child cries for 2 out of 3 hours that they're here. If they tried, and my son tried, but it isn't getting it, shouldn't they come back to it the next day instead of pushing until he's completely frustrated? Or is that the point, to push him to a meltdown so that they can teach him how to work through the meltdown? Again, I'm probably overthinking it, but that just seems like a lot for a 3-year-old. She did go on to say that his therapists are very young, 22 and 23, with no prior experience to her son doing ABA with children as young as his son, or just doing ABA in general. And she says, because I've only been doing this for 2 years, it's still somewhat new to me, and I have no idea what the right approach is. Can you please help me to understand what a good approach to ABA would be, and if it sounds like my son's therapists are doing ABA the right way, or if it needs some changes. I'm in desperate need of your advice. I don't know how much longer I can go through this much stress just from one session, or sit around the corner from my son and just lose it, listening to him cry hysterically, see mama, see mama. Thank you so much for taking the time to read my questions and concerns. And I just think, you know what, this is so... I did write back to her and say that we were going to answer the question today, and I said, I'm sorry that I'm making you wait till Wednesday, but I really wanted you to answer the question. But I believe that every single parent that has done ABA has had this moment where it's like, I don't know. They're young. They're 22 and 23. Are they doing the right thing? Are they pushing him too hard? Am I being a bad parent for not sticking up? I don't quite get it. I thought I got it. I don't, and we have this crisis in the hallway and we're crying. So and this is even depicted on the A word. Yes. It happens on the A word. Yeah. And what I love, and then I am going to let you talk. Please. When I was watching the A word, that episode where the mom is standing in the hallway saying, I don't know. And you do get to see what the therapist was doing so that you know what was happening. And I was watching it and my son came up and I was crying. And he said, what's happening? Why are you crying? Why is she crying? And I said, because this reminds me of when you were little and I used to sit outside the door and cry. And so we started having a discussion and he said to me, oh, Mom, I was fine. I was just frustrated.
No, that's so sweet.
At 8, he said that to me, and I shared that with the A word mom because I would have paid such good money for somebody to tell me at 8, he would just say, no, I was fine, I was frustrated.
Yes, of course.
But I know that there's a lot here.
Right. So, and I want to ask you, do you remember what was going on exactly on the A-word scene where mom is sitting in the hallway?
I know exactly.
What was going on?
So Jack Riley was playing trains. And he wanted to lay on his side to look at the train because that's, he wanted to look at it like this. And Jessica said, sit right. And she sat him up to sit right. And he, was affronted by that and laid back down on the ground, and she wouldn't let him. So she just gently said, sit right. And then he got mad and said, he was 2.5 at that point, so he got up. Like, if he couldn't do it his way, then he wasn't going to do it. And he sat in the chair and cried for a half an hour.
Right.
So and mom was like, why couldn't, and all moms go, why can't you just let him watch from the side? And they do explain in the episode why you can't let him watch from the side. What that will prevent him from being able to do down the road, and how he's not going to get to side-by-side play with his peers and have friends if he's laying on the floor on the carpet.
Well, right, and it is a self-stimulatory behavior.
Yeah.
Gazing and looking at things, that thing is a well-known self-stimulatory behavior.
Yeah.
So in that case, the ABA therapist is preventing the child from doing self-stimulatory behavior, which is a symptom of autism, and we always want to try to prevent those things that contribute to the child being more isolated.
Yes.
So that's why she was doing it. Now, this is a little bit of a different situation, and we need to talk about this. So thank you for writing so much detail, because it really does help me visualize the whole thing, and I might be able to give you I will give you some advice for sure, and some of it you might want to think about some of the things through my answer, basically. So he's 3 years old, and he's receiving 13 hours a week. First of all, 13 hours a week is not enough for a 3-year-old. That's my first piece of advice, is that if he's 3 years old and if he's doing well, which it sounds like he did really well for a long time, he should be getting 40 hours a week. That's that. 13 is in the range of it doesn't work. Let's just be very clear. There's a lot of research that shows that anything below 25 hours it will help him to some extent, but it'll never help him catch up enough. And it sounds like, and when you're 3 years old, that's the highest point, by the way, which is at 3 we should be hitting close to 40 hours, because that's when your child's brain is the most flexible, and that's when he's going to learn the fastest and most. Now, you've been in therapy for 2 years, maybe a little bit less, because I don't think he would have started at 1.
Well, he might be about to be 4.
4, right.
Which because I looked at that too, and I was like, wow,
absolutely.
She started therapy early.
So you did start early, still at 2
Yes.
even, and he's almost 4. And I thought that I understood the approach and technique. So in other words, in the past 2 years, you haven't really had this issue. So what I would like to ask you is, what changed? What I'm reading is this: my son was doing so well, progressing and flying through these goals, right? He'd met all the goals, and then they did an assessment and came up with more goals. First of all, I don't know what assessment they did. With us, it never happens that you meet all your goals. Well, actually, let me take that back. Only when you're at the recovery stage, like when you're at the very, very end of intervention, is it possible for us that the child would have met pretty much all of their goals. We do an assessment, and the assessment shows very abstract new things that we haven't thought about, like inhibition, working memory, executive functions, various things like that show through an assessment. But at 3, it never happens that we finish all the goals and then an assessment comes in and says, oh, you didn't do this, especially something as basic as who. So who should be already, that lesson should already be part of his curriculum. They are teaching that lesson incorrectly, by the way. I will get to that in a minute. But the whole section where you write, they did an assessment, they came back with new goals. I wonder why that is. Then it says, anytime in the past, my son was fine with this change up and flew through it. This time, they're a little bit more strict on him in terms of pushing him more during session until he gets something right, making him stay in the room for 2 to 3 hours instead of him being allowed to change rooms and come and see mom when he wants to go outside. Why? Why did they make those changes? It makes no sense to me, because he was doing great. Why would you change something when everything's going great? There is no reason. This is not the military. We're not trying to break people, especially not 3-year-olds. So there's no real reason. I can't think of a reason why they would want to not allow him his reinforcers. His reinforcers are mom and getting to take a break. Those are the things we teach our kids to be reinforcers. They should be asking for that. If you ask for something and you don't get it, that behavior of requesting extinguishes, and he'll stop asking for things that are reinforcing. You don't want that.
You know what my question was in
Yes.
reading that? Because I'm hearing from a lot of parents whose kids are starting significantly before 3.
Yes.
And that their ABA provider is giving them like an ABA light when they're 2. Like they're not really following through on stuff because they're like, well, they're 2, so they're not really following through. And then later on,
But he was meeting his goals.
I know.
So it's not
and not
like
only that, I mean, like, why would you set up a circumstance in which a child gets away with something and then later on
take
change
away?
it? Because
It's a waste
anybody
of-
would be like,
Absolutely.
hey, wait a second, that's not how we do it.
Absolutely. And the truth is, and I guess this is the overall answer, and then I'll go into much more detail, but the truth is there's something wrong with the program if the child is crying for 2 hours, if the child is having a meltdown. There is definitely something wrong if this was not happening and it just started to happen. It is not your assumption here of what ABA should be, and that's why I was asking about the A word and what was happening there. Your assumption is that they're trying to get something from him, and we need to work through this until he responds. That's not really how it works. We don't really want to kind of work our kids through the system so that we win. That's not really the point. If he's crying, look at it this way: when he's crying and tantruming and screaming and asking for mom, there's a function. There's a function to that behavior. The question you always ask when there's a behavior that disturbs you, whether it's a challenging behavior or an upsetting behavior like this one, something that is not okay. You always ask the question, what is the function? Don't forget, that's your number one question. What's the function of this behavior? And you answer yourself by saying, if he could speak instead of crying, what would he say? Mm-hmm. And what he would say is, I need a break. I want to see mom. This is too hard. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Stuff like that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that he's crying at the furthest I can reach on trying to say this is what they're doing is fine. The furthest, at the very minimum, what this therapist should be doing is prompting him to use his language instead of crying. Yeah. In which case he would say, I can't do this. I don't know. This is too hard. I want a break. See mama. He is saying see mama, and it's being ignored. So that's where, to me, this is incorrect. Okay, yeah. This is not the procedure that should be in place. Now, I'll go a little bit further. Actually, he's getting his tokens, and then they ask it. Okay, so now the lesson itself. Let's analyze the lesson itself for a minute, and I think that might give us a little bit more understanding. This is why at CARD we do clinic every 2 weeks, because sometimes there's and by the way, your therapists are young, but your therapists do what their supervisor tells them to do. It has nothing to do with the therapists being young. They're both doing it the same way. They're following instructions from their supervisor. Their supervisor should know better. A lot of people don't know this stuff because you learn ABA and then you haven't had the chance to apply it to a child with autism. And I feel like there's experience plays a big role in this, and you just have to be able to, most likely your supervisor doesn't have children of their own. Sometimes when we're very, very young, we just push because we want the child to go faster, and we don't really we don't remember all the things. So I'm not blaming anyone, but I'm just telling you there's a few problems with the way they're teaching this. So what they do is they will ask him who is holding the block. So I assume they will show him a picture of someone he's holding the block. And then they'll reply with he will reply with holding the block. Okay, first clue here. Whenever there is echolalia, that means the child didn't understand. Okay, that's rule number one. echolalia means he didn't understand. This is echolalia. He's responding with the last portion of the SD, of the instruction. That means, am I supposed to repeat?
Yeah.
If I'm supposed to repeat, that's what I'm doing. Holding the block, he doesn't know what they're asking him. Now, then they say child's name or I'm holding the block. So in other words, what they're teaching him is, and I don't know his name, let's say his name is Bobby. So they'll say Bobby holding the block or I'm holding the block, both of which are the wrong way to teach him. So that is the incorrect form of this particular lesson. The who lesson, which is part of a series of WH lessons that we teach, who, what, where, when, and so on. First of all, I don't even know if he knows what. What comes before who? They should be teaching what first, which is easier because it's prompted by the object being there. Once they get, so in other words, I'd say, you know, what is this? And the object is there and the child only has to say it's paper or it's pen, whatever it is. Who comes when you teach who, it's much, much, much easier if you use two-dimensional stimuli first, which means pictures of people holding things, because then it's the name of another person. When you start with, that's the first step. The second step is either the therapist or the child. You never start with a rotation, which sounds like what they're doing here, because rotation, he doesn't have the concept of himself. I and you, I'm holding, you're holding, pronouns as a whole are extremely confusing for our kids. I don't even know if he has pronouns separately. That's a lesson that should have already been mastered. I don't know if it has been. This prompt of the child's name or I'm is not a good prompt. It's really that simple. It is not a good prompt. The prompt needs to be in a visual format, or he needs to know I'm and I am and you are. And by the way, he needs to know verbs for that as well. So pronouns have to be done first. The actions have to be done first. What needs to be taught first? When who is taught, it needs to be done with 2D rather than 3D first. There's a lot of errors in this order of what they're doing. That's causing him confusion. There is no question he's confused. He's not having a tantrum because he doesn't want to respond. He doesn't sound like a child who has a hard time doing lessons. He's responding. He just doesn't know the correct response. That's frustration. That's not challenging behavior. Challenging behavior is like, yes, this is a little bit hard for me and I don't want to be here, so I'm going to try to get out of the seat. That's not what he's really doing. He's trying to respond. Guaranteed, if they do a different lesson, he'll be fine.
Right.
So that means he's not trying to avoid therapy. It sounds like he's just getting frustrated with this lesson, and that's called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is pretty much the last thing you want for your child, because what they learn is no matter what response I give, I'm helpless, I lose. So there's no way for me to earn my reinforcer, so I give up. And that's what causes the children to cry, 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 and be upset, and then just basically ignore the person or not want to work with the person. Now, all of that said, you said, my question is, should ABA therapy be this hard? No, ABA therapy should not be this hard. It is hard because we have to place progressively higher and higher demands, right? Because you start typically with a child who's just due to the diagnosis, everybody's left the child alone and allowed the child to do their own thing. Over the course of time now, what happens is we're trying to get the child to acclimate to their environment, to learn from environmental rules, to abide by whatever is going on. And that means abiding by rules, doing what society expects. So when I want to teach a child, you know, which child do you think would prefer to be in tutoring or learning sessions all day as opposed to playing? No child. Autism or no autism, no child. Every child prefers to play, sleep, eat, do all the things that are natural and fun. No one wants to sit there and learn a new language. And that's what your child is doing. So as a result of that, because there's higher demand, there has to be higher reinforcer than the normal environment. If we were to sit with every child in their normal environment and just keep pounding them with homework and stuff, they would never succeed. That's our kids. When you look at typically developing kids, that's why they are always, like, when you look at the kids in high school, and when in high school gets very, very hard for them and they start acting out, it's simply because the level of reinforcement hasn't increased in correlation to the level of difficulty. They have tons and tons of homework, which they didn't in grade 1 or 2, but they still have to do it. There's no higher reinforcement. That's why it becomes very important for teens to have additional reinforcers in their lives. Otherwise, they'll go and find them in the wrong place, you know? And so I think what's happening with this child is he's just not getting an appropriate amount of prompting and an appropriate amount of reinforcer. Everything becomes easier. Like, as we increase demand, we increase prompts, obviously, because it's a new lesson, correct prompts, not confusing prompts. And then we also increase reinforcers. And that is what helps the child succeed. Modeling is the first prompt, and then gradually you reduce the prompt. You always start out, no matter what phase of the lesson, you always start out with a very easy instruction and a ton of reinforcement. Over the course of time, you reduce the reinforcers and you increase the demand and you reduce the prompts. Initially, it needs to be easy for him and highly reinforced. I don't know why they changed their tactic with this. I can only guess they just don't know how to teach this lesson. And this has become a hard lesson and they don't know what to do. Here's what I recommend you do. Get on Skills. Go on our Skills for Autism website. Just go try to do the sample. I think they still have a trial period. If you want to go in there, actually, I recommend you just become a member. It's good for you because you can track all this stuff going forward. And go in there, answer the questionnaire, which is long, but your child is young, so it shouldn't take you ages, but it's lots and lots of hours of answering assessment. Once you're in, go to the language section and look up the WH questions lesson, and you'll find the lesson written out in exact detail, what they should be saying, the types of prompts they should be giving, what is the response, teaching, like different points that will help them in teaching. And that's how they should be doing. And that's basically it. They need to make the prompts more clear, increase the reinforcer, and that's it. Now, this whole thing that I said is very specific to what you wrote. That does not mean that in the future, every time he cries, you should run in there and try to rescue him. Because running in there and rescuing him teaches him not to trust them and that only you will be the one that will actually respond to him. And it also teaches him that crying is an appropriate way to call you. We don't want that. We want him to just say, they should be teaching him, I want a break. I want to see mama. And they should give him breaks when he does that. And they should allow him to see you when he asks for you. But nevertheless, he can see you and then come back and continue doing the lesson. It's really that simple.
I so appreciate you saying that, because I think that's confusing for a lot of parents about, when do I interrupt?
Right.
And I was always told you don't. Ask questions about it when it's over.
Right.
Give them the benefit of the doubt while they're doing it. But I do think it's important for us as parents to learn, because one of the things that I learned that helped me so much is that, what you were just outlining about how we kind of move the goalpost. But when it ceases working, mm-hmm. when you're making it harder and harder and harder and it stops working, you get to a point where the child isn't progressing, you go back to the last thing that you were doing that worked.
That's right.
And if you have multiple days and multiple sessions where they're not doing that, as a parent, we need to key into that. Absolutely. And ask why not.
And I'm really sensitive to this. There's this whole series of experiments in psychology called learned helplessness, which mm-hmm. was they were trying to kind of figure out how hostages react to various things, and they basically took very intelligent dogs and they trained them to press a lever whenever they saw a circle. And if they pressed the lever whenever they saw a circle, they would get a food reinforcer. And if they pressed the lever whenever they saw a very long shape, like a long rounded rectangle, but very long oval shape, then they would get a electric shock. So that was the punishing reinforcer, which is called an S delta, and this was the reinforcing stimulus, which was the SD, the mm-hmm. discriminative stimulus. And the dogs learn this instantly, right? Very smart dogs like Dobermans and so on. They learn this kind of thing very fast. They would never press the lever to receive a shock. They knew to avoid that. Then what they started to do was to alter the shape very slowly, alter the shape of the circle so that it became slightly longer, and and the oval became slightly shorter, and up to a certain point the dog could still discriminate and there was no problem. But it got to a point where the circle had become close enough to the oval that it was confusing for the dog, and they never knew which one to press.
Yeah.
So no matter what the dog did, they would get a shock.
Yeah.
And it became very, very aversive. And guess what the response level was? The response level wasn't that they would continue, they just stopped.
Yeah.
Stopped responding. And that is basically what happens with prisoners, hostages, etc., because you learn something, which is a rule set,
Yes.
and then they take away, like you said, they move the goalposts to the point where the rules don't make any sense anymore. I mean, that's a very drastic thing, and I don't want to compare it to what your child's going through or scare you any further than you already are. I just want to say that, sometimes your child's crying because despite everything being done right, the demand is high.
Yeah.
And the child, as a child, doesn't really want to work. That's fine. But this does not sound like that. What it sounds like is that the child has no way of figuring out. I would be totally fine if they didn't allow the child to leave the table, but they prompted him a lot correctly so that he would get one correct response,
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like they're giving him a prompt. I'm not sure how he's supposed to figure this out on his own.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what the problem is.
And I love the quote that, when teaching isn't working, it's never our kid's fault. It's always time to
It's
look at the
always
teaching
something-
or the teacher.
Absolutely. And you have to realize that they can do a million things. They can increase the prompts, they can increase the reinforcers, they can reduce the sessions, they can actually allow him to have break time.
Yeah, lots of
of
different
stuff.
things. I want to take a break, but before we go to break, I just want to mention some of the different people that are writing in for different places. Albert is writing in from London, Ontario, Canada. Erica is watching from Monterrey, Mexico. Yasmin is watching from Longview, Texas. We had Helen, who's watching from Liverpool, England. We've got the whole world
That's
watching
amazing.
here.
My husband Greg is from the London, Ontario area. He's from
I did
Cambridge.
not know. How about that?
So hello to Ontario.
And Stella says hi, and she also wrote in and said, I wholeheartedly agree, kids therapy should be towards the fun end of the scale. Life is stressful enough.
Oh
Thank
my
you,
gosh.
Stella, for that. So we're going to take a break. As we go, I came finally in the mail. The thing that the NASA gave us
Oh my
came.
gosh, how beautiful.
Isn't this wonderful?
Absolutely.
That they gave this to us. It says, Autism Live, thank you for capturing and sharing NASA, its workforce with your audience, your friends at NASA Johnson Space Center.
That is
So we got to put this up on the wall. So thrilled. It kind of got lost in the mail.
That's so
But it
nice.
finally made it here. So we again want to thank everybody at NASA at Johnson Space Center. We had such a good time. We've got video of us with Temple coming soon. But first we're going to a break, and then we're coming back with more of your questions for Dr. Doreen. Stick with us. Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she's answering your questions in real time. We're thrilled that we are on Facebook Live on a regular basis now and have so many viewers who are writing in and telling us where they are from around the world. Don't forget that you can write in questions on our Facebook Live. You can write in questions on our YouTube channel, and you can write in questions on our live feature, which is at autism-live.com. The Autism-Live is the one place to go if you want to write in and be anonymous. And you can also send that question that we just answered came in via email. You can, if you have a longer question, and you want to remain anonymous or not, you can write in to me at s.penrod, Penrod, at autism-live.com. Okay, I want to continue on with a question that came in on our homepage, autism-live.com. What would be your advice for someone who received different diagnoses? My son was diagnosed at the beginning of this year by different doctors. One said autism and ADHD. The other said something different. I can't really remember. Something about speech pragmatics. I'm so lost. He is receiving OT and speech therapy at school, and it has helped tremendously.
Well, you're asking a behavior analyst, so my response would be you need behavior analysis. So, I mean, I'm glad that he's doing well with speech and OT. ABA is just more intense. Applied behavior analysis is going to be more intense, and it's going to help your child catch up a little bit faster. If someone gave him a diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and someone else gave him a diagnosis having to do with pragmatic speech, I would say that I'm inferring that he must be pretty high functioning and would really benefit from advanced programming using ABA techniques. So I would recommend that you look online. We have a website for advanced cognition, skills advanced cognition.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, is that what it is called?
Yeah,
if you
I
go
believe
on the
so.
skills website, I think, or
I
you
have my
just
little tent.
right. Skills is our curriculum. It's skillsforautism.com. If you go on there, and then I would go from there. You can find the advanced cognition curriculum. Advanced cognition is for our very, very high functioning kids who need help with things like social cognition, understanding other people's perspectives, executive functions like planning, being flexible, knowing how to set goals for themselves, knowing what to pay attention to, those types of things, the more advanced skills, social skills, and so on. And it sounds like that's the kind of stuff that your child might benefit from. You'd want to do that kind of content using ABA techniques. And even as well as behavioral techniques, maybe even some cognitive behavioral techniques. But I would recommend doing that because the sooner our kids learn, the better. Speech and OT is usually done at pretty low intensity. And if that's helping him tremendously, wait until you see what ABA can do. So I would highly recommend you try that.
Absolutely.
And of course, you will need a diagnosis of autism in order to do intensive ABA, because then you will get insurance coverage for it, most likely. Otherwise, it's not one of those things that you want to pay for privately. ABA needs to be done, at least 10 hours a week for a child who's very, very high functioning, and that can become costly.
My question about this is because, they got two different diagnoses. And so whenever you got two different diagnoses, that sounds to me like somebody doesn't want to pay the bill.
Oh,
so,
I see.
So my question is, did the one that's about speech pragmatics come from the school?
That's possible. That's very possible. Or it could just be two different psychologists who are confused because the child's so high functioning.
Okay.
See, I get a lot of people coming to me for second and third diagnosis because when the child becomes high functioning, when the issues start to be more pragmatic speech,
okay,
people don't know what to do with that.
Okay.
They don't realize that it's what's classified as a level 1-1 on the autism spectrum. It can very well be. But most physicians or developmental pediatricians won't know autism that well. They'll think of autism as a much more severe thing.
I see.
And we do have kids who are very, very high functioning, but they still classify for an autism diagnosis.
Okay.
So it could be that, or like you said, it could be a school district who's trying to divert you and not fund it.
And if you've got one doctor who said autism and ADHD, I just want to point out, you said as a behaviorist you were recommending ABA, but that is the gold standard.
It is the gold standard
of treatment for autism. I'm not aware of a single study that says doing speech and OT at school will make a substantive difference and take your child to a different level of functioning so that their diagnoses could possibly be adjusted.
Right. In fact, there's a lot of studies that show that it won't.
Right.
So yeah, there's tons of studies that show that just doing speech is not enough.
Right. So, I love your candor about saying, well, I'm a behaviorist, so I'm going to recommend behavioral intervention, but beyond, I mean, there's no question the science is there to say that, you need good quality ABA.
And I also want to just throw one more thing out there, which I don't want to confuse things more, but the ability to diagnose autism and ADHD together is just something that came about approximately 3 years ago. Yeah. Before that, we were not allowed to diagnose ADHD if we gave a diagnosis of autism, and I think there was good reason for that. It is very difficult, and I've been diagnosing for many, many, many years, thousands of kids. It is very difficult to separate the symptoms of ADHD from autism. When you have autism, you have, as part of autism, you have a little bit of attention deficit. It just is a natural it's like, and it's much more pervasive than ADHD. So it's very hard to say, oh, you have ADHD and autism, because one kind of overshadows the other. I guess it's possible to do it if your child has ADHD of the hyperactive type, because not all children with autism are hyperactive. ADHD is two types, either impulsive or hyperactive or both. And so if you're very, very hyperactive but very high functioning autism, then it's possible to give both diagnoses. But when I read all of what you've written, it just gives me the impression that your child is very high functioning, and perhaps the people giving you the diagnosis didn't know really clearly. But as Shannon said, if you have if you're even on the border of autism, there's nothing better than to do ABA and get your child to help your child get over whatever deficits or problems they have.
I would go even further. Since ABA is something that's used universally by corporations and by Olympic athletes, and
Absolutely.
I mean, it's been shown to be the most effective teaching tool. ABA would benefit any of our kids, right. Absolutely any of our kids. If you have an autism diagnosis, you're entitled to get it with funding assistance in almost every place in the United States.
Yes.
So fight for that. And if somebody gave you a diagnosis of autism, it's going to give you a ticket into a room to get some help that would be good for any child.
Right.
Don't get caught up in this, well, does he have autism, does he not? Just go, ooh, I got some help. I got a gold
Right.
ticket. I'm going to take advantage of it.
Right.
And then move.
Exactly.
That's my
No,
less
absolutely.
finesse, but I'm like, say, I know it's the reverse of what we think we want when our child is born. Like nobody goes, oh, I hope I get an autism diagnosis, right? That's
Absolutely.
I mean, this week we're commemorating that it was 11 years ago that we got the diagnosis, and I remember how devastating it was. But when I think back, getting that diagnosis on that day started us on a path where we got all the help and support that we needed.
Absolutely.
So I celebrate that we went through the motions, and so somebody gave it to you. Use it as your golden ticket.
That's
I
right.
want to talk about a couple of things that are coming in on the comments. Pandacom wrote it in and said, hi, I have mild autism and I love this channel. We love you back. Thrilled that you're here with us. Marilyn wrote in and said, I wish the ones working with my child were this knowledgeable, but that's why we do this hour, so that people can learn, and we welcome therapists to be able to pick Dr. Granpichet's brain as well. And there are lots of things that you can share with the people that are working, share this channel with them. They can ask questions. You can share skills with them. You can share IBT with them.
Absolutely.
The Institute for Behavioral Training, where they can learn how to, be more knowledgeable.
And I want to say on that front, as you're doing that, Shannon, that I think it is really valuable for our families if they learn the techniques themselves, because as a parent, it's pretty scary that when you see your child just crying continuously and you don't know what's going on. I'm a behaviorist. I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and I used to question my own techniques with my children. I'd be like, am I doing everything right? Why is she still crying?
Yeah.
So I completely understand how it feels as a mom, and it's very empowering if you do go on the Institute for Behavioral Training, which I think is ibehavioraltraining.com.
Yes.
And you go to the parent section and you learn all this stuff, because this is stuff that it just becomes second nature to you, and it'll be easy for you to understand when something's being done right or wrong.
Yeah, if you like what we do here, which is like glossing over the top of things, and you want to delve further in, you can do those trainings at ibehavioraltraining.com, and they're really inexpensive. And, and I know everybody goes, well, I say to somebody, oh, something is inexpensive, or somebody says that to me, and I'll go, how inexpensive? And they go, it's only $3,000, and I go, that's expensive to me. These are $7.50, some of them. So I think we can all agree that that's in the name. That's less than if you went to buy a book, a soft cover book. So, and then Marilyn, I don't know if this is the same Marilyn, said, can you define? It is the same Marilyn. Can you define high functioning autism? Because we've been using this term during the last hour.
And thank you. That's a great question. I love having interactive, even when I even when I do conferences and there's like 100 people in the room, I always want interactive, which doesn't always work out the best, but it's really great because you just make sure that people are involved. It's fabulous. So, and I shouldn't really, I use it for the purposes of being short and concise and getting to the point, but autism is a huge spectrum, as we all know. On the one end of the spectrum, I suppose severity of autism will. Okay, so here's how I'll answer this. There are children who are very severe, and then there are children who are very mildly affected by the symptoms. There's two main areas right now, according to the diagnostic criteria now. There are two main areas of deficit that are involved with autism. One is the sensory, what we call social communication. So that involves all of the social areas and language, so communication, also nonverbal communication, so eye contact and so on, as well as all the social things that can only develop once we have a certain amount of communication. So social communication has been joined into this one domain. Then the other area of deficit or strength is the area of self-stimulatory or repetitive stereotypical behaviors. And those could be things like anything that isolates the child, and strangely enough, under that classification, we also now have sensory regulation or dysregulation. So basically, in order to get a diagnosis, the child, we look at symptoms in those two areas. We look and see that, so the child is delayed in language, is delayed in social skills, and then also, the child has some repetitive behaviors or has sensory dysregulation. And yes, you have both of those areas and you have enough symptoms in each area, then you have a diagnosis. Now, the good thing with the new system is that it allows us to rate you from 1 to 3 on the severity of each of those domains. So in social communication, let's say if it's a child who's very only has issues with pragmatic speech, that means social language, like understanding if someone is saying something in an ironic way versus a real way, understanding when, let's say, people are laughing with us versus at us, those types of subtle things. If that's their only problem in the social communication domain, then I would rate it as a 1, which means this individual requires minimal support, okay? On the severe side of that, the same area would be a child who's nonverbal, has absolutely no language yet, no ability to socialize yet because they can't communicate, and that would be a 3. On the other domain, the other area, which is sort of the stereotypic repetitive behaviors, you could have a child who, for instance, really likes to keep their things in a specific order, and that might be a 1. Versus you could have a child who has a whole ton of self-stimulatory behaviors, lines up objects, turns the lights on and off, has repetitive echoing and speech, and that would be a 3. So you can have a combination of those two numbers. So you could have a child who's a 1-1, That would be what I classify as very high functioning. You could have a child who's a 3-3. That would be a child who has the highest level of severity in both domains. Or you could have various combinations. You could have a 2-2, you could have a 1-3, a 3-1, a 2-3, and so on. And these classifications allow us to this rating scale allows us to identify it gives you at least 9 combinations of the severity of autism that the child has. So literally, when I talk about high functioning kids, I'm talking about kids who are either a 1-1, I feel, or probably just the 1-1 group, or maybe even a kind of 2-1 or 1-2. So kids who are very mildly affected by one of the major domains.
It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, so
yes.
I'm glad that somebody asked for you to define it. But I do want to point out to people that a lot of people say high functioning, and their criteria is heaven only knows what.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because yes, you're totally right. I see a lot of parents when they come to intake, when I first do their initial evaluation, will say my child is very high functioning. And then when I see the child, I'm like, no, the child is pretty autistic.
Yes.
So it is a very subjective. For me, it's not that subjective because I diagnose, I rate kids, and I'm a professional and I see kids a lot. So it's easy for me to kind of classify that way. It's also very important for me because I'm very data driven and I'm also a behavior analyst. It's important because the goal is, these numbers are not stable for life. They're very fluid. So the goal for all kids, even if you come in as a 3-3 child, the goal is for me to get you to 2-2, 1-1, and then out, right? Yeah. And as soon as you are 1-0 or 0-1, you no longer classify for autism. So let's be clear on that. And you can go through life having slight social oddities, but nothing else. You can go through life perfectly well, still being a little bit obsessive compulsive, but nothing else,
Right.
So
not needing that support.
Exactly. And these numbers have to do with the level of support. Thank you. That's very, very important. A 3-3 means they need the most support. That's what it's all about. So yeah, it's a very subjective term. I appreciate the question. It's a good one.
But I appreciate you saying that too, because I think a lot of people don't understand that your ability to be a different number is fluid.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's funny you say that because back in the 80s or so, my mentor, Lovos, wrote a paper and it was all about the permeability of IQ. Because back then it was like a big deal that we were saying, hey, we are changing IQ, intelligence quotient scores, IQ scores for our kids. And everybody was like, are you crazy? But the truth is, that's the whole goal of ABA. And I'll go through this again. ABA, when we measure IQ, intelligence, what it is your mental age divided by your chronological age times 100. So my mental age would be, let's say, 53, and my chronological age is 53. So 53 divided by 53 equals 1, times 100 makes my IQ 100. 100 is normal IQ. 15 points below it or above it is also normal IQ. So 85 to 115 is normal IQ. Now, if a child has, let's say, a mental age of 5, but their chronological age is 10, then that produces the number 0.5 times 100, then the child's IQ becomes 50. 50 is a very retarded number for IQ. And as your mental age increases, as we teach you stuff, your mental age goes up, your chronological age is going up too, but hopefully you're learning faster, and so your mental age eventually catches up. That's the whole goal, is to get your mental age to catch up to your chronological age, and the minute that happens, your IQ is normal. And that's what good ABA does. It doesn't just eliminate challenging behaviors, it teaches you everything you didn't learn at an earlier stage due to whatever isolation you were in or whatever was causing you, your senses, poor instruction, your whatever it was that wasn't getting through to you.
And so it is flexible. I want to just address, because you used a word that I'm sure a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, she used a word. the R word.
Retardation,
but,
yes.
But it is, one of the things that we've talked about this before on the show, although there is a movement to not use the word stigmatize, it is a word that exists in the dictionary and has a meaning to it. There was a medical term. And so I just want to point out that Dr. Graham-Bichet was using it as the medical term for it, because a lot of times people have a
lot of
reaction
emotion around
to
it, and we don't, as providers and as professionals, we don't, because it is MR, mental retardation, is a diagnostic term.
Yes.
And really all it means is that your IQ is lower than a certain number. Now, there's several levels of MR. Retardation can be very slight, in which case you are considered borderline, or it can be very severe. And that's another one where you really, it helps us identify the level of support an individual needs. If you have very severe retardation, that means you're scoring below 30, you really seriously need a lot of support in order to be able to cope. You know, and I'll just go ahead and clarify this one more thing as well, because I know that people with autism or parents of children with autism are pretty sensitive to this word, and they have very good reason to be sensitive, and that's because many years ago, Shannon, like when I first got involved with this in the 70s, people used to equate autism with mental retardation. Now, mental retardation is a disorder that exists in conjunction with other things, or on its own, right? And the MR can exist on its own, or it can be as a result of a injury, or it can be as a result of a congenital injury, or it can be a result of various other disorders. Now, with autism, I believe the reason there's sensitivity is that historically, people used to think that children with autism have retardation. Yeah. And that is absolutely not the truth at all. In other words, and I've been a big proponent of making the world understand that, because, you know, we were one of the earliest organizations that started measuring mental age using nonverbal tests. You know, early on, when children with autism were given IQ tests, the same that we're given, these tests are language normed tests. Like, I give you instructions verbally, so it's not really fair. It's kind of like someone measuring my IQ in Chinese.
Exactly.
Right? I'm going to fail.
Right.
I'm not going to know what you expect of me, not because I can't do it, just because I don't understand it. Just similar to the other example we had given. So a lot of our kids were being scored as mentally retarded, and when you look at at the same child, you give them a nonverbal IQ tests that are made for hearing impaired children, and you give that, and they're scoring 30, 40 points higher. Right. So you know that our children have this raw intelligence. There's no question. They just can't express it because they don't have the language to let us know. Now, and the language, of course, delay can be caused by many other things. Absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure our viewers know that I'm one of those people that strongly believes that children with autism do not necessarily struggle with retardation. And I also want to make sure everybody knows that the word is really being used as a diagnostic term and not something that should offend anyone. I hope it doesn't.
And I apologize to everyone because we've gone way over, and I apologize to you because I know you always have meetings, and I'm so sorry.
I want to thank Samantha, because now that she has us on Facebook Live, it's a lot more exciting for us.
Well, and I thank her as well. And I do want to say, as we leave this, that Logan Shepard wrote in and said that he was watching, and he said hello to you.
Say hello.
Absolutely. Well, you can. He's watching.
Hi, Logan.
We love Logan. And Marilyn said, thank you. I have hope again. And honestly, that's what this is all about. That's Marilyn, right. Sending you a hug.
For the month of August, I figured we'd do some fun in the sun activity. We're gonna make our very own frozen bowling game. It's super fast and super easy. I was inspired by some lessons I saw in skills. All right, so let's get to it. The materials you'll be needing are water, water bottles, balloon, and food coloring, which is always optional. First step you're gonna do is make your bowling ball, since it'll have to freeze overnight. The first thing I'm gonna do is take my balloon and put a few drops of food coloring in it. This is optional. If you don't have food coloring or your child has an allergy to it, don't use it, but I thought it'd be fun to make everything super colorful. So, I have my food coloring. I'm gonna put a few drops in here. And then, take this to the sink and fill it up with water and tie in a knot. Here's my balloon filled with water and the food coloring. I'm gonna take this and place it in the freezer with some towels just so it holds its shape better. Our next step is to make the bowling pins. I have 10 recycled water bottles that I've refilled with water. Now I'm gonna put some food coloring in them.
Straight to the center at full speed. Light will surround you in a blink of an eye.
Now that my bowling ball is frozen and my pins have been filled with water, let's go outside and play with these.
See all the colors in the sky tonight. It's time to let the sunshine hide.
I hope you and your family have fun with the frozen bowling game like I did with my friend Emily. Well, until next time, craft on, guys. Bye.
Can you see me flying by your side?
Hello, fellow activists. Last week, I introduced you to step 5 of the 10 steps to empowerment, shore up spiritually. Let's talk more about finding ways to do that, how to find out what lifts your spirit, feeds your soul, and make it a practice. That practice is different things for different people. It could be the practice of meditation, of prayer, of community worship, or serving others. But it's the practice that will give you hope and faith and strength for the journey ahead, for the marathon journey of raising a child with autism. I get inspired every day by the families of children with autism that I come into contact with, like the parents of the nonverbal child who have not given up hope that that child will speak one day, or the grandparents who should be enjoying their retirement but instead are joyfully raising their adult grandchild with autism, or the mother who is fighting for services for her daughter while her Marine husband is fighting a battle to keep our country safe. They all inspire me. My grandmother, Diddy, who is an angel who still guides me every day, had this quote inscribed in her Bible. I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. I sought my brother, and I found all three. I think I'm finally starting to grasp the meaning of that. So feed your soul, lift your spirit, and until next time, keep the faith.
Good morning and welcome to Let's Talk Autism. I'm Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson
And I'm Shannon Penrod.
with shades on.
We mentioned at the start of the show that this is not Halloween. I'm not doing my Ray Charles impersonation. I got a little bit of an eye infection that makes my eyes sensitive to light. So I'm
Right,
taking a
and
little
these
bit
are bright
easy.
lights.
These are bright lights, so I'm taking a little easy. Plus, which it's not pretty. You guys don't need to see that. But thrilled to be here with you, and we've got a wonderful guest, a regular here on LTA.
Right.
Vince Renman is joining us via Skype. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist, brilliant, able to see things. It's all about the perspective taking, right?
Right,
And
all about perspective taking.
Vince is able to see things from the family's perspective and understand the things that they're going through, and especially going through an intensive ABA program because he was an ABA therapist for many years, has a particular expertise. I mean, he's great at all things, honestly, but a particular expertise with our teenagers. So he's a pretty fabulous person to have around. Vince, thanks
Hi,
for
Vince.
joining us again.
Good morning, ladies. How are you?
We're good. So Vince, we want to talk today about back to school because a lot of kids have already gone back to school, but most of us are facing that in the next week or so. And it can be a very tough time. Do you have some pointers that can ease that transition for moms and kids?
I think that the first thing that comes to mind is we want to actually start talking about it, right? Start talking about it. that it's on the calendar, that the kids can start predicting that school is coming, right? Most of our kids have difficulties with their transitions, and they have difficulties with things that come up unexpectedly. So we want to make sure that we are putting it in their calendars, we're putting it in their forethought, so that they know that a transition will be coming. We want to get them excited for it rather than being anxious for it.
Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty with your audio there, Vince. So I just want to back up a little bit and say, repeat, because I think what we got from that was that communicating about it, not acting like it's not happening.
Right.
Communicating in whatever way that our kiddos receive information, whether we're making visual reminders on their visual schedule, or talking about it, whatever works for them. Now, Nancy, when you, I would imagine that you and Wyatt are already talking about the fact that school's starting soon, yes?
Yes, he went to register today, actually.
And I'm sure that's an exciting thing. Now, does he, at this point, because he's about to be a junior in high school, right? Does he have anxiety starting out the school year?
Yeah, he always does. He always has a little anxiety starting out the school year. And Jem is back to school?
Jem is back to school, and it's interesting to watch, because it would be very easy for me to look at him and think that he's not having any anxiety about it. But there were a couple of things that he did that I was like, oh, and in a way, I gotta say that I'm glad, because for years it just looked like nothing affected him, right? But to know that he's cognizant of it, that he's aware that he's having a typical amount of, anxiety also means being anxious.
Right.
It's not necessarily bad. So it was interesting for me to be able to note that this year and see that he was excited, but a little bit of anxiety about it, which I think is a pretty normal way to look at school.
Of course. I mean, don't you remember back to having him?
And
that's a point to remember. We all have anxiety with going back to school. We all have anxiety going back to work. We all have anxiety when there's change that's going to be pending. And our kids are no different.
Yes. And so, Vince, what, besides the communication part of it and being open about it, what are some things that we can do? I know I'm big on the antecedent modification, giving my son expectations and then promising big rewards that have like goalposts, because that's the only thing that I see that works. But I'd love some other tips or tricks from you about ways that we can jumpstart this and have a fabulous new year.
In regards to starting the school year, or in regards to continual, school readiness skills?
Well, I think it's both, but should we be starting it in the first week, or do we want to give them a week to acclimatize and then say, here are the expectations? When do you think is the good time to do that?
I think setting the expectations now is what you guys want to do, because you want to start talking about it. You want to start, again, we as the adults want to initiate the conversation about it. Because a lot of times, as you were just saying with Jen, sometimes they're not going to be so upfront about their anxieties, and we're not going to know it until something happens, right? There's either a behavioral outburst or something comes up and we think, oh my goodness, they're very anxious. So if we're proactive, just like you were saying, using antecedent modifications, we're starting to deal with it before a behavior happens, before the anxiety gets to a threshold where it's going to be disruptive to them. So I think talking about the expectations now, setting up the reinforcement systems now, starting to actually just reinforce them now, just talking about it, is really laying the pavement or laying the roadwork for a good transition to the start of the year.
Something that I've done my whole life, because I'm a former school teacher, whenever I'm talking to a kid, and it could be a 4-year-old, I'm not talking about necessarily on the spectrum, off the spectrum, but whenever I'm communicating with a kid and I say, what grade are you in, right? And a lot of times I'll guess. So if I'm talking to like a 3-year-old, I'll say, I'll bet you're in college, right? And then it's funny, right? But whatever grade they say they're in, I always say the same thing. Oh my gosh, you're so lucky. That's my favorite grade. Oh, you're going to love that grade. Oh, don't you love that grade? That's the best grade ever. And you know why? And then I try to remember something that's good about that grade. So if they say second grade, I say, oh, second grade is the best. And then they go, really? Because, I wish that people had done that for some things with me. I remember the first time I ever went to go on a plane, somebody said to me, "Oh, I hope you're going to be okay." And they didn't set me up for success. If they had said, "Oh, you're so lucky, plane rides are the best things, and, they're going to bring you a package of pretzels," I would have been like, "Oh, that's cool."
Right,
And I would have
right.
faced no fear. So I think some of it is about giving them a perspective about school being good, right,
Positive
Vince?
reinforcement.
Absolutely. And you want to make this exactly what you're saying. You want to make this a positive thing.
Okay.
This is going to be the best year. This is the year that's the most fun. Your teacher is fabulous. The work's going to be fun. You're going to meet new friends. Yes. You want to make it every year a special year. Every year is going to be the best year. Every year is going to be a positive year. And really pump them up about the excitement that's to come. Right?
Vince, we're going to pause you for a second. Vince, we're going to pause you for a second because we're all having a hard time understanding what you're saying.
Yeah.
So Nancy and I are going to talk for a second while you and Samantha see if there's a way that we can fix it.
Right.
We'll chat, but hopefully we'll be able to get Vince back for you because he's saying some really powerful stuff about making it the most positive thing it can possibly be.
Right.
There's we never want to make it sound like school is 100% perfect.
No.
Right. But if we feel like it's someplace that's positive in general to go, it shouldn't feel like it's the dentist's office. Let's say that.
No, and you want to be realistic, but at the same time enthusiastic with your child.
Absolutely. And focusing as much as you can on what's fabulous. I know, it's hard, and please know that over the years when Jem would come home, in the beginning when he would go to school and he would come home and I would say to him, "So how was today?" And there was a non-response.
Right. I still get the non-response.
Right? Well, in the beginning, I don't think he even understood what I was asking. Non-response. He didn't understand. Then, we worked on some specific things, but it was a lot of years of me asking specific things. One of the tips that we've had here on the show that so many of our experts have said is that because we don't know how to prompt them and we don't know what the correct response is because we weren't there, we're genuinely asking the question,
Right.
what happened?
Right.
And if the kids don't have that facility, then it's a failure every day. And we feel bad and they feel bad, and eventually you stop. What they suggest is talking to the teacher and or the aide and saying, every day I'm going to ask him what happened. Can you send home 2 pieces of paper that I can prompt from? That something about what happened in art today, and that knowing that they just write you a little note saying, ask him about art. He did a really great painting. So then you would say, Wyatt, how was school today?
Right.
How did art go?
Right.
Did you do any painting today?
Right,
Tell me
right.
about your painting.
Right.
And then you've got a place to go from, and that really primes the pump for the kids to be able to talk to us. And then it's really gratifying because you're having something back and forth. Keep your expectations realistic.
Because it's a natural thing for a kid to say when you said, "What did you do at school today?" "Oh, not much." That's probably
totally typical, right?
Across the board's typical.
Right. But we want to foster that, back and forth. I'll tell you the other thing that I always used to do is because they always make such a big deal coming back from a break. What did you do over your summer break? What did you do over your holiday break? And it used to be the bane of my existence because Jem couldn't remember any of that. He couldn't pull that from his memory and talk about it. So I would always prompt him in the days going up to the first day of school to say, "So what did you do?" And he would be like, "Nothing." And I would say, "Well, that's not true. Remember, we went to this museum and we did this and you saw this family member." "Oh, yeah."
So you gave him ideas that he could then get at school.
I think that helps our kiddos on the spectrum because they're not thinking of things the way the rest of us do. And those sort of filler things that teachers have to sort of keep the conversation going, they're not important to our kids. But it becomes important because if your kiddo can't respond back, then it's another one of those, there's a dropped ball, right? We're hearing that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get Vince back.
Hopefully we got some understanding of what the things he said.
But I want to reiterate the things that he was saying about make sure that you're communicating about it so that it's not a shock or surprise. Make sure that you're upselling it and making it fabulous. One of the other tips, I know that he was going to talk about is that if you have an opportunity, go to the school, especially if it's a new school,
brand new, or
walk
your
the
child's first year
hallways.
at school.
If there's, find out where they hang up their stuff and have them practice without all the sensory stuff, so that on the first day they're there and they're set up for success. That if you have the opportunity to meet the teacher beforehand and have your child meet the teacher beforehand, it's great. So many schools with all the cutbacks don't pay the teachers until the afternoon before. They literally have like 1 hour to set up their classrooms before school starts. It used to be, can I just tell you, that we used to have like days before the kids would get there, we would decorate our rooms and go all out. And then there would be an in-service where they would have a guest speaker who would come and get us all riled up for the school year.
Right.
And then we would have team meetings, and it's all gone. Now the teachers get about 3.5 minutes before your kids arrive to get whatever they can together. It's a little bit hard for the teachers. It's a lot hard for our kiddos on the spectrum who could do with a meeting beforehand.
Right.
But do what you can, use what you can. And I always say, bribe people. Let them know that you're a nice person. Let them know that you are in support of them, that you will be in support of them. Send nice notes
Bring a
to
little
the
gift,
teacher.
maybe.
I don't think that's a bad thing to do. And I always think the mom who wrote in and told us in the first year that we were doing Autism Live, and she said every year she gets those sheet protectors, and she has the back half of it be a magnet, and she puts the IEP in a sheet protector and gives it to every single person who will be interacting with her child, including the person who's working the cash register in the lunchroom.
Great idea.
And I think the vast majority of them won't necessarily know how to implement it, but that's why the BIP should be there too. Give that to them. I'll tell you, the school notices that, and they don't want to have a problem. We're going to come back with In the News and talking about a school that has a problem.
Right. Okay.
A big
Yeah,
problem.
we'll take a little break and we'll be back in just a minute.
Stick with us.
Hi, Lisa Ackerman back with Talk of Facts. Questions, real life questions and answers for the autism journey. Oh, are you ready for this one? Talk to me about puberty. So what I would recommend is, first and foremost, is the kids that have done the therapeutics, the medical, and the dietary allergen removal interventions tend to have an easier time at puberty. Seizures are really common for children on the spectrum, more than neurotypical populations, and they're especially most common right at or about puberty time. So it's extremely important, even if you have a 10-year-old, that you've already done an EEG, that you consider before they go through puberty to get a second EEG done. Just because you have one clean EEG with no abnormal brain activity or seizure activity, you need to do another one prior to puberty. That's one of the most common calls we get with teens on the spectrum, is they are often experiencing a seizure for what their family thinks is the first time. And the third thing is, you're gonna have a teenager, so you're really gonna have to kick it up a notch on those life skills, social skills, and getting your kid ready to be that teenager they need to be. So if you're doing that baby thing, and I know you are, where you're maybe making their lunches or helping them with laundry, we need to start bouncing some chores over to those kids. And we also need to increase social environments where they can be successful. So think about it. We've got 3 really important things that we need to look at. Puberty is a very serious issue, and we take it very seriously. So make sure you have all of your therapeutics, medical, and dietary interventions in place. Consider to do another 24-hour EEG with your physician prior to puberty. And the third most important thing, get ready to raise the bar. Your job is to really get them ready for life. And I know you can do it.
And we're back with Let's Talk Autism, and we've got some stories in the news. Let's start with the disturbing story about a 10-year-old boy with autism who was restrained and handcuffed by a school resource officer.
If my eyes weren't bloodshot before reading this, they would have been afterward.
Right.
This is the kind of story that really, really hits home, I think, for all of us. and makes me so mad that sometimes I shake. We covered this story in April, but now.
Yes, it happened a while back.
Back in Denton, Texas in April. And 10-year-old boy was restrained not once, but multiple times by a resource officer at the school because he was following exactly the protocol that he was taught, and that was what he was taught to do. But they released the videotape this last week so that you have an opportunity to watch it if you can stomach it. What's really upsetting to me is that the boy, they report, we always talk about on this show about, well, what happened beforehand, right? That's the first question we always want to ask. And they reported that he was agitated all morning and that he was swinging his arms and that he, was poking other students and very, very agitated.
And allegedly unplugged a computer mouse and started swinging that.
Okay. And then the teacher called the resource officer and said, I'm going to need some help, because she said to the boy, you need to go to this room that they have that's a safe room where the kids can't hurt themselves. And instead of doing that, the boy went over of his own volition. You see him on the videotape. He goes over and he inserts himself into a cubby. So he is sitting peaceably into the cubby when the resource officer gets there with the body cam.
Right.
And so at that point, this is where it diverges, because they're saying, well, he followed protocol. And I get it that when we ask a student to do something, we need to be following through with that. Completely understand. But this is where, if you have somebody who's trained versus somebody who's not trained, because safety is the priority, right? If the child has now calmed themselves, you don't follow through on the thing. This what makes me mad. These scream rooms that people have, they think that it's a place to send somebody in punishment. It is completely not. It should be a safe place for when they are upset. So if the child does not want to go there, it is not where you should send the child. The child put himself in the cubby and had calmed down, but they were following through with the order of, you need to go.
Right.
And
because he did not leave, the school resource officer went in and picked the boy up and walks out of the classroom with the boy.
And the kids started, shocker,
flailing
his arms and legs. Yeah. Then they got him into the scream room. They don't call it a scream room, but that's what it is.
They put handcuffs on him twice.
And what I do appreciate is that the resource officer is most of the time talking in a very calm voice and, in a level voice, and he's saying things to the boy. But if you understand children with autism and a 10-year-old with autism, the way he's talking to him is as if he's talking to somebody who's perpetrated a crime. Right? And he's staying calm, and it really is textbook what a police team would teach somebody to do. And this is where problem number 2 is, because after they've evaluated the tape, the school district has said, well, all of our people followed the protocol, and we were taught by the police department, and these are techniques that are used by the police department, and so we are following the protocol. And my thing is, well, how's that working for the police? Like, it's the police that need to be taught techniques to de-escalate things and how to get it not to the point of cuffing people, and not to the point of cuffing a 10-year-old. So when a school district says to me, well, we were trained by the police department, I want to run screaming into traffic and going, this is completely bass-backwards, right? It's the police that need to get trained first.
Right.
And not have police that are already doing these things the news is filled with things where people are saying the police have gone too far, they escalated something when they didn't have to. And why are we letting them train the police on how to deal with a 10-year-old for a school? I just want to scream.
Yeah, there were many other options for de-escalating this situation instead of escalating it. And the family is hard.
Moment.
Right.
Key moment when he was in the cubby where they could have just stopped everything right there and said, okay, are you feeling calm?
Yeah.
Do you want to go to the room to calm down for a little bit? Do you want to have a break? No. We put in a demand, you got to follow through.
Right.
Well, and then look what happened.
The family's hired an attorney, so we'll be following this case. Yeah.
Because that is the only way. And I don't know if you read the comments on the story that I printed up here, but there were comments from people saying, well, that child should be homeschooled. And
That's not the answer.
Right? And it is not the answer at all. And people saying, well, that family is just looking to make a buck. I got to tell you something. I bet you not. I bet you not. I've seen this mom talking on the news, and she cries and says, he's a 10-year-old.
Right.
Why did it have to get to this point? And honestly, I have been in circumstances before where I could have filed suit and I chose not to because I was like, I don't want to do that. But you know what? The problem persisted. And I'm telling you that this is the only way that school districts hear is if you say you're doing it wrong and I'm taking you to the bank on this. That's the only way it changes. And next time it will be your child. So, it makes me mad when people go, well, that child should just have stayed home. No, there's
not
laws
the answer.
against that.
There are.
Thank you very much.
Isolating the child is not the answer.
Free, appropriate public education.
Okay, we have some scientific stories in the news. One is from Science Daily, that there's potential biomarkers for autism in infancy.
Yes.
A study of young children with autism spectrum disorder revealed altered brain waves compared to typically developing children during a motor control task.
And isn't this interesting? We keep hearing about these micro movements that kids on the spectrum make, that the more we delve into this, we find the earlier that autism can be diagnosed. And this is essential because if we can diagnose early enough, the child won't be behind. And then, because a lot of what happens with autism is we have to catch the child up from skill acquisition. So if you can diagnose early, what an amazing thing. I found it really interesting that they looked at 5 to 7-year-olds and they played a video game that required them to press a button to feed a puppy. And they found that in the children with autism, it was a longer reaction time and reduced gamma oscillations in their brains.
Right.
And that it was in line with the severity of their symptoms. So the more severe their autism presented itself, the more severe the lag was. So being able to look at that, and it really makes me wonder because a lot of our kids, not all, but many of our kids are into video games. And we started on video games originally because they were talking about the mirror neurons lighting up, which is going to affect our next story. And that when using games like the Wii Fit, where they see an image that is them and they move and it moves, that it was helping kids with autism to light up their mirror neurons, which would help with other things spatially and for them not to be, when you and I watch the Olympics and we see somebody just, ski down a mountain hill, the part of our brain, if we were doing it, lights up because it mirrors what the activity is doing. That kiddos with autism, not so much. So we went all in on video games. Many people say that it's not a good thing for kids with autism, but I'm wondering if it helps with the reaction time.
Yeah.
Okay, one last story, and then we got to get to our guest.
Neuroscientists have an array of tools for understanding the brain, and one of the most impressive approaches involves implanting electrodes into the brain to record neuron activity. It's invasive.
Yes.
But sometimes it's necessary for medical reasons. In the cases of epilepsy, for example.
Epilepsy that can't be treated by medicine.
Exactly. Neurons have been implanted. And this is called, here's the technical name for it, intracranial electrocephalography,
encephalophagy. No, we both
neither
failed.
one of us are very good. But it's IEEG. It's gaining popularity.
Okay, so the thing about this that I find interesting is it's very small, the case that they've looked at, 2 individuals who had epilepsy and happened to also have autism. They were treating the epilepsy. But what they discovered was in the amygdala, thank you, that when they looked at faces, the amygdala did not react in the way that people who don't have autism react.
Right.
So more that we know about the brain, we know that the autism brain does not recognize faces in the way, but it literally shows up in the reaction of the amygdala. So we're honing in on what part of the brain is affected by this. And what they've been able to do for epilepsy when they put these electrodes in is that they can record what's happening with the brain. But the truth of the matter is that they know that they can send signals back the other way too.
Right.
And so in the future, they want to look at if we send an electrical current in, does it wake up that part of the brain? And would that part of the brain then recognize faces in the same way. It's all very cutting edge and it's all very controversial. We were talking before the show about the fact that I'd love to have John Elder Robeson on the show to talk about the magnet therapy that he had on his brain. John Elder Robeson, who is brilliant and an artist and a writer, and he is one of the most respected self-advocates in the autism community, and would tell you and tell anyone that there's nothing wrong with having autism. His brain works differently. But he had this therapy to see if he could see what he might be missing. And it was very emotional for him because he, for a brief period of time, saw colors in a completely different way that he now believes is the way that you and I see colors, and he was never seeing them that way. So, and you and I both talked before the show about if I had the opportunity for a day to have somebody do something to me where I could feel what it is like to be a person with autism, I would sign up in a heartbeat.
I would sign up in a heartbeat as well. I'd love to have that opportunity.
To have that ability to see what is it like from this different viewpoint, from this different vantage point. So this might lead to interesting things. Check it out.
Cutting edge, once again.
All right.
It's in Spectrum News.
All right, we have a wonderful guest who's going to be with us in just a few minutes. We're going to take a short break, and then J.R. Reed is going to be with us talking about how he received a diagnosis and why he is a self-advocate and what he's doing about that and the particular age range that he's targeting, hoping to help. So
okay, we'll be right back.
Stick with us.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Johansson, and this is My Little House.
My Little House is an interactive, multi-sensory educational felt toy that I invented to help develop children's language skills.
I love My Little House.
I've been working as a speech therapist for over 20 years. I have spent my entire career working with young children. I work with children with language delays, and I have many children with significant cognitive disabilities and children on the autism spectrum. It has been a constant challenge finding toys that are fun, educational, and actually engage my students. In every preschool since I've been a young therapist, we carry on these felt boards. Kids love them because they're soft and they're fluffy, and there's usually these little pieces that attach to these boards because felt sticks onto felt. You bring them into the activity because they're putting a piece on the board. So it's almost kind of like magic. So then I just thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just take this one-dimensional board and make it into an actual three-dimensional toy? How cool would that be?
That's the idea behind My Little House. You can spread it out flat like a 4-panel felt board, or here's the cool part. In the blink of an eye, My Little House easily converts into a 3-dimensional reversible house.
This is the outside. This is the inside.
My Little House comes with 36 felt cutout pieces that match outlines in 8 colorful rooms. And they're felt, so they stick. Each piece inside My Little House has been placed with purpose.
For instance, in the kitchen, whole, half, under, on top, inside, big, bigger, and biggest, empty and full, circle, triangle, inside, outside.
Really cool thing, I have a nonprofit, Lecotech. They are the folks that put out the Differently Able Guide for Toys R Us. They've been doing it for 25 years. They gave me their seal of approval as a toy that they feel is a toy with purpose, and that will make a difference. But My Little House isn't just for kids on the spectrum or with significant disorders. It's also for typically developing 2 to 5-year-olds. It's a fun toy.
Oh, this is so soft. That piece goes.
Recently, I took My Little House to the American Speech and Hearing Association convention in Philadelphia, and the response from my peers was overwhelming. Hundreds of therapists, teachers, and heads of school districts wanted to order them.
It was real validation for me that this truly is a toy that needs to get out there.
Hi, I'm Shannon Penrod. I'm a proud autism mom, I'm a former educator, and I am the host of Autism Live. And as all 3 of those things, I want to recommend to you My Little House. This is one of the smartest toys I have ever seen for teaching language to kids who have emerging language. Whether they're on the autism spectrum or completely neurotypical, it's a great, fun, reinforcing toy, but it's especially great for our kids that are on the autism spectrum because it makes learning fun and it makes it tactile. They have these felt shapes and they get to match them up. And I'm telling you, even the adults love to play with this. We loved this toy so much that we wanted to be able to bring it to you at a great discount. So right now, if you will go to www.smartfelttoys, and when you get to the coupon code, put in a-live.com, you'll get $5 off. Isn't that great? So I want to encourage you, go and get My Little House for all the kiddos in your life.
And we are back with Let's Talk Autism. And as we said, we have a special guest with us today. J.R. Reed is coming to us from the Ozarks, where he moved from Long Beach about a year ago. How you like it there in the Ozarks, J.R.?
You know, I really like it. As somebody with Asperger's, the sensory overload alone is just amazing. You know, I go from traffic and lights and stuff going on 24/7 all the time to 2 lakes within 5 minutes of my house and trees and nature and quiet.
So that sounds like it's been very good for you. You were 46 when you were diagnosed with Asperger's. Why so late?
Well, I was out of high school for 10 years before there was even autism that was talked about in people in school. In my 30s, I tried to get diagnosed by 2 different doctors, and they both said that they would not test me because they saw no point in knowing what the problems were. I wanted to know what it was. I want to know, am I just weird, or is there something wrong with me? I wanted a name for it so I could know how to research it, and if there were ways that I could, you know, find some little tips and tricks to get around it.
And you mentioned you wanted to know if you were weird. Do you feel like you were treated differently and that you were made to feel different as a young man?
Oh, I played ice hockey for 20 years recreationally, and I would not even use the words that I was called a lot by kids. But I had, from 5th grade through high school, I was called weird, stupid, and lazy by most of my teachers, even though my IQ is enough to make me not stupid.
I'm just curious, for so many of the adults that we talk to when they get the diagnosis late, they report that a lot of things start to make sense for them.
Absolutely.
Was it like that for you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had a boss that for 4 years called me Forrest Gump to my face in staff meetings and sales meetings, would call me Forrest Gump. And it was nice that I could just go online and research and find out about Asperger's and, you know, what the different traits were. And now I had an explanation for my traits. And, you know, I knew then that I could kind of change my lifestyle a little bit to avoid a lot of the sensory overload and a lot of the things that would trigger what I used to call weird and anger moments that I know now were just the meltdowns and kind of the pre-meltdowns.
That are caused by sensory, no kidding.
Talk about some of the books that you've written. Your first book, An Asperger's Guide to Dating Neurotypicals. Tell us about that book.
That book, that's the only book that's actually been published.
Okay.
That is a lot of my dating experience and marriage. It really has a lot to do with communication, because in every relationship, communication is so important. But I think in a relationship between a high-functioning autistic and a neurotypical, you've really got to crank that up, because we don't read facial cues well. We don't read tone of voice real well. So, and here's the example I use. You know, if somebody says, hey, you know, I won free tickets to this concert. Somebody goes, oh, you suck. Well, they mean it, you know, in a teasing way, like, hey, congratulations, you know, I wish I would have won.
Right.
But the Asperger person might think, darn, they're really mad at me. So if it's just a simple question like, are you angry about that? Or can you explain that to me? Just a simple question. And that makes all the difference in the world and keeps you from being upset all day or being in a funk or having a great day.
Yeah. And in the dating world, that can make the difference of a successful date or never seeing the person again.
Right.
Absolutely. And, you know, it makes a difference in a relationship too. You know, and the principles that I talk about are communication, respect, honesty, understanding.
All great things. Now, do you describe yourself as a self-advocate?
Oh, absolutely. I am a self-advocate, and I also work with kids from high school on up through adult. I work with neurotypicals as well as people that are on the spectrum. I help do training with first responders. And this school year already, I've started booking times to work with 2 different school districts to speak with the neurotypical kids, to explain to them who we are, that we're not all Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory.
Right.
Although some of us are a little more like him than we'd like to admit. But I'm also working with the autistic kids to try to explain to them a little bit about how to feel better about themselves and talk to them about how they can work to fit in with the neurotypical kids and really integrate. I'm a big proponent of neurodiversity.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you say is that autism is not a disability, it's a different way of looking at things.
Absolutely. In the book, I belong to a Facebook group, Asperger's Life Support, and I put out there, I said, hey, I'm looking for a couple examples of how to explain the differences between a neurotypical brain and an autistic brain. And the electrician gave me a great example. They said it's like Christmas lights. String of Christmas lights, if one bulb burns out, some lights, the whole string burns out. Some, just the one bulb burns out. But once you replace that bulb, everything works again.
Now, you also have a blog, is that correct?
I have a blog called Not Weird, Just Autistic, because my whole life I grew up until age 46 thinking I was weird, and now I'm autistic. Although, as it's been pointed out to me many times, with a purple goatee, now I'm both weird and autistic. And especially in my community near Branson, Missouri, where it's a community of about 15,000 people, I can't hide with a purple goatee like I could in Long Beach, you know?
Right.
And back to talking about the books real quick. I am working on a book called Autism Isn't Contagious, and that's geared more towards neurotypicals, explaining who we are and how they can accept us and integrate us into their society. And I'm writing one called Asperger's is My Superpower, which is kind of the story of me going from childhood up until my diagnosis.
Okay. And you mentioned that you deal with a lot of depression, anxiety. It tends to come with autism?
That does tend to come with autism. In fact, when I speak and when I blog, I call them autism's evil cousins.
Okay. And do you have any tips for dealing with those when you talk with others?
Just that, talk to a psychiatrist, psychologist, if you need to be on some medicine, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be on medicine. It's not the stigma that it used to be. And I find, a lot of help in talking to psychologists. And the funny thing is, when I lived in Long Beach, it was 2 hours away for me to find the closest psychologist that specialized in autism. Out here, I've got one 45 minutes away.
Well, that's great. And I know. And you also have a service dog, I understand.
I have a service dog named Ty who comes from a place called Dogs Nation. They use only rescue dogs. Ty was actually found as a puppy in a garbage bag in a dumpster and taken to a shelter. And Dogs Nation works with several shelters, and if the shelter director thinks they could be a service dog, they'll contact Dogs Nation. Dogs Nation will come out and spend a day or so with the dogs. If they think that they can be a service dog, they'll take them. If they end up not being able to be a service dog, then they will adopt them out just like a shelter would.
And does that help you with your anxiety and depression?
It helps with the anxiety, and it also helps when I'm out. I mean, he does things like when I'm in line at a grocery store, he'll get behind me and keep a little distance between me and the person behind me. Or if I'm talking to somebody and they seem to get a little too close to me, he'll get about 2 feet in front of me to keep that little barrier so I don't feel like I'm being smothered by somebody.
Right.
Amazing.
Tell us
Go ahead. But the problem is he's so cute that I think people actually kind of are my friends sometimes because they like Ty more than me.
Tell us where our listeners can get your book and how they can reach you.
Well, they can buy an autographed copy, which is the same price as anywhere else at jrreadauthor.com. It's also available on Kindle, and it will be available on Audible by the end of the summer, and it's available on Amazon US, UK, and Europe.
Okay.
And the book is $7.49.
And you got a podcast coming soon.
Yep, I'm working on another co-host for me, and I'm going to do a weekly podcast called Not Weird, Just Autistic. And I do some occasional videos that I put up on my site that if I actually get my button gear, I'm going to start doing a little bit more of those.
Very cool.
Okay.
And I do a weekly column for a very large site called Good Men Project, goodmenproject.com. I do a column on Sundays called Not Weird, Just Autistic. And they have a weekly group mental health call that anybody can call into on Thursday nights, and I host that.
And how can people find that, JR?
They can go to goodmenproject.com, and there's a link to the social interest calls.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking forward to hearing more about your projects and your books, and hopefully all the great things you're up to. Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much, JR.
Hey, well, thank you for everything. And by the way, thank you for everything you do for promoting the cause.
Oh, you're welcome.
As somebody who is on the spectrum, I really, really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you so much.
We're thrilled that
No
you're
problem.
out there setting an example for our young men. It's a wonderful thing.
I do my best.
Okay, thank you. Okay, have a great day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back.
Talk to us a little bit about what your degree is in.
City planning or urban planning.
I got it from Cal State Northridge with a degree in cinema and television arts with an emphasis in screenwriting.
And what are you interested in, Eli?
A video game internship.
Computer programming.
I'm hoping to combine entertainment or travel, my two passions.
Ooh. What kind of jobs have you worked?
Bakery inventory.
Okay, inventory.
Talk about your volunteer job.
Operation Volunteer to help the soldiers.
You volunteered to help the soldiers?
Yes.
I interned in the national parks in the Santa Monica Mountains, which is very urban area. So I worked with the problems of how it's impacting the surrounding community, like the flow of traffic and the flow of people and what they could do to plan in the parking.
I've been to China. I've been all around Europe. I've been to Thailand, Japan, Australia.
You can create an app? That's impressive. Really cool thing. Can you teach other people how to make an app? If you have a choice between working or not working?
Working.
You like working.
Yes.
Why? What do you like about working?
It is fun.
I would work.
Yeah? You would choose work? Why?
Cause I want to get paid and enjoy it, and want to make sure I have enough money so I can save it.
Why do you need to have a full-time job? I mean, it's kind of like a duh thing, right?
No, obviously, so I
Yeah.
can support myself
Right.
and hopefully a family down the line, but at least at first, myself.
I'm very dependable and always reliable and get to my job on time.
What excites you about working a job or being an intern?
Learning new skills.
Yeah. What has it meant to you having this job and having the stability of a job that you've had for multiple years?
It's meant the world because I'm able to do everything, but almost everything I wanted to do because of that job.
And we're back with Let's Talk Autism, and you
We had a
said we got a
question.
question come in.
Cynthia wrote in and said, how does eating and autism go hand in hand? I know they do. My 2 boys have recently been diagnosed and they are super picky. I had a bad feeling. I feel bad feeding them the same thing, but that's all they will eat. Okay.
That's
Great
very
question.
common. Very common that a kid on the spectrum is a picky eater. It tends to go with the
Very-
territory.
Yeah, it does. But okay, let's talk about a couple of different things.
There's
that,
so many things you can do and ways you can go.
Absolutely.
It's a big question.
It is a big question. And that we've done a lot of videos on feeding, and you might want to check and see what some of our experts have said. But the first thing that we want to make sure is that the child is thriving. If they're eating enough so that they're staying healthy and they're not super, super skinny, there's other things that you can be working on. We want to work on desensitizing them to foods that they are really aversive to, but there's a time and a place for that. So for instance, if your child will not eat spinach, but they're eating at least occasionally a green vegetable, life goes on. You don't have to have them be able to eat spinach when they're 4.
Probably
right?
what you're finding is that they're only attracted to carbohydrate foods.
Very likely.
Cheese and carbs. That tends to be dairy and carbs tend to be
Potatoes, the
what
chicken
they
nuggets.
want. Right.
I used to call it the tan food.
Yeah,
white
I called
and
it the
tan
white food diet.
Right, and that's all that they want to eat. I will say that there are lots of different diets that are out there for autism, and one of them that's across the board that people generally try is the gluten-free, casein-free diet. And always the parents that come to me and say, I just don't want to do that. I don't think that that's really it. Their children are almost always the kids who are just eating the white food stuff, right?
Right.
And so the fear is there's not going to be something else for them to eat. The truth of the matter is that gluten-free chicken nuggets are available in every single grocery store now.
As are gluten-free pastas, gluten-free bread,
Yes.
dairy-free. All of these are available substitutes
Yes.
for the same foods.
So what you can do to try the gluten-free diet, because a lot of times it doesn't work for everybody, but for some kids we see that it frees up their guts, which frees up their language, which frees them up to be able to learn. And then in the course of that, they'll be willing to eat other things. So the first thing you could do is take gluten and dairy out of their diet and have all those substitutes. We should put together a list of which ones are the good ones, because there are bad chicken nuggets that are gluten-free and there are good ones.
And there's bad cheese and good cheese.
Oh, yeah. And can I just say that there is a particular kind of chicken nugget that my nieces who are not on a gluten-free diet and visit, they always like, can we get the good chicken nuggets? And what they mean is the gluten-free ones. They're not cheap, but we buy them when they're on sale.
Yeah, a lot of these foods are a little bit more expensive, so you should be forewarned about that.
Yeah, but if you watch the sales and stock up and freeze things, you can make it through, because we've all done it on a dime. But I will say this, that if you really, really, really want to have your child introduce more flavors and more colors and more textures, there's one method that they have found to across the board, as long as there is nothing medically wrong that the child can swallow, that works, okay? And what that is mixing it in with something that they like by grains of sand. So the example that they always would talk about in workshops is chocolate and spinach. So if you want the child loves chocolate and you want them to eat spinach, you take like a piece of spinach that is so small you can't even recognize it to the human eye and mix it in with some chocolate. The child won't notice, right? Then you put just a little bit more, and it might take you 3 months to the point where you're putting a piece of spinach this big in with the chocolate, and a year to the point where the child is having spinach with one little shaving of chocolate on the top. And I know it sounds disgusting, but they can get a kid to eat anything doing this.
You can also use the reward principle, which is to give them a tiny bit of the unpreferred food and then the reward food right afterwards.
Absolutely. And all of these things, I mean, there's great cookbooks out there where you can sneak vegetables into things. Look, I don't do this for my son, I do it for my husband. I sneak broccoli and carrots into a meatloaf. He doesn't know.
Yeah.
I sneak zucchini and carrot juice into muffins that my husband and my son eat up like, they're candy.
Right.
And what that does is it acclimatizes their taste buds to what's happening.
Right.
We're out of time.
We're out of time, and you wanted to talk about tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow on the show. We had to reschedule her from before, but Judith Feldman is going to be on the show tomorrow to talk about her book. That it just you have to read it, Nancy.
I know.
It's
well,
killing
you're going to
me
give
that
it
you have
to
not
me.
read it.
Okay.
Yes. The myth, and she's going to be on the show.
Okay.
Plus, we've got an amazing guest who's going to be on talking about a program called Free to Be, and this is for our young adults that are going to go and live in an assisted living situation, and how amazing of an opportunity that can be for our young people.
I want to read that one too.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a powerful
Okay.
show. So don't want to miss out on that. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me.
And yourselves a hug from me. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye for now.